My interest in astronomy stems back to when I was a teenager and my uncle built his own 14.5-inch reflecting telescope. He basically bought the mirror and got all the bits from scrap and put it up in his back garden, and then he'd have people round on warm summer evenings and sometimes in the cold depths of winter to look through his telescope. And I've got very clear memories as a teenager of looking through his scope at the rings of Saturn and the moons of Jupiter and being utterly entranced by what I could see through his scope. But then it was quite a few years before I got back into astronomy, and it wasn't until I was living in Sydney in Australia that I saw a course advertised at the Sydney Observatory, just overlooking the Harbour Bridge and beautiful Opera House, that advertised how to manufacture your own telescope mirror. Basically, it was a course that was designed to take the mystique out of telescope making, and my wife and I went to the observatory for probably the best part of 2 months every Saturday afternoon to grind our mirror and have it tested. And shortly after that we had a mirror, but then it was many years before I actually got a chance to assemble the whole thing and get it working. It wasn't until I moved to the UK in the mid-2000s and joined the local astronomy society, and then I go out with people from the society up to the local heath, and I can remember very clearly the first thing that I found through my scope was the Great Globular Cluster in Hercules, and being completely entranced by that. And shortly after that I found the Ring Nebula, and then lots of galaxies, and I could find anything with that little 6-inch reflecting telescope on its little Dobsonian mount, and that was really my introduction to astronomy. I'd also take it off to star parties. I went to Kelling Heath and the Isle of Wight for a couple of years in a row before I really invested any more in commercial telescopes, and it was because a lot of my friends were into astro imaging that I got fascinated by what they could do with relatively simple equipment, or perhaps not so simple, as I found out to my cost a bit later. So the first telescope that I actually went and bought was a Skywatcher ED80 apochromatic refractor, and I stuck my 550 Canon DSLR on the back, and I was able to get some quite passable images for quite a while, and that piqued my interest. Although one of the problems that I was having was that I was sitting on the rear patio at home, and I'm lucky I live in a little village that's got no street lighting, so we have quite dark skies and we can see the Milky Way from our back garden. But I'd often set up, and a couple of hours later it would cloud over and I'd have to disassemble everything, and with astrophotography you've got lots of cables and lots of components and it takes quite a while. Or sometimes I would set up and I'd just get going and it would cloud over, or I decided not to set up and it would be a clear night. So I decided that rather than get more equipment like a lot of my friends in astronomy were doing, that I would get an observatory. So I just decided that I was going to build one. I was looking online for a steel pillar to mount my telescope on, and that's when I found home observatories up in Norfolk, and I thought that the price was pretty reasonable. So rather than building an observatory myself and making the errors doing it for myself the first time, I thought I'd go with a company that had learned the way to do it over 15 years, and this is the result. I've been very happy with it. So after I got the observatory, I then decided I was going to upgrade my camera. I'd always wanted a cooled camera, and a couple of friends had been to a company in South Korea called Central DS, and they modified Canon cameras. So my first exploit into more specialised astro imaging cameras was to get this modified Canon 600D. Everything had been stripped out, it was put into a brand new housing, Peltier cooler on the back, the bandpass filter had been removed, and that would cool down to about -33 below ambient. I remember being very excited, taking it out of the box, getting it into the observatory and putting it on the back of my little Skywatcher ED80, and then watching the focuser wind back out. The scope and the focuser just wasn't strong enough to be able to take the camera, which weighed about 1.5 kilograms. So I looked at upgrading the focuser, but it didn't really seem an economic thing to do. So again, back off to star parties, look at what everybody else had, and I settled on a APM 107-700 apochromatic refractor, and I've had that for a couple of years now. I'm very happy with it. It's just here in front of me, which is why I keep looking up, and that gives star absolutely crystal clear images. It's quite fast, so at native focal length it's an f6.5, got a Massimo Riccardi 2.5 focal reducer, and effectively that reduces the focal length by 0.75, so my 700 becomes a 525 focal length, and it goes from an f6.5 to an f4.5, so that's pretty fast, and with a cool camera I can get reasonably good images. I'm already starting to think about what I want to do next, probably some narrowband hydrogen alpha, but I may also look at one of the modern ZWO CMOS cameras which are now coming on the market, and I've seen some remarkable images online. I really enjoy going off to star parties because observing can be quite a solitary thing. It is quite nice to be out into the stars on your own on a nice clear night, but it's also lots of fun to go out with friends, and I go down to the Isle of Wight probably twice a year. Sometimes I go down to Somerset with some friends, and I've been up to Kelling Heath a couple of times, and these are great events because everyone's so sociable and you can see the latest equipment that everyone has, and particularly at Kelling Heath you get these huge Dobsonian reflecting telescopes, some of them are 24 inch, 26 inch or bigger, and it's fascinating to look through those and look at globular clusters and far off galaxies, and just imagine what it must be like in those clouds of stars away from our galaxy. I think that's a fascinating thing for astronomy. So I hope you've enjoyed the story of my astronomical journey. If you'd like to learn more, then I plan to share more about the equipment that I've been using, a little bit more about my observatory, some of the star parties, and some general astronomical topics. Then please consider subscribing to my channel, leaving a like, and I'll be back with more content very shortly. Wishing you all clear skies.